I am so excited to talk to you.
Oh, I think you and I may be the only parents in the room, though.
No, there's probably a couple of, we're not going to ask for a show of hands, but I'm going to, you know what? Everyone is a child
Has
of
a
someone
parent.
or has a parent.
Right,
Exactly.
there you go.
So, first of all, Oprah loved this woman's first book, The Conscious Parent, and as far as I'm concerned, Oprah is like never wrong, ever. So that's all I needed to know. But one thing, before we get into the nitty-gritty of your book, that I absolutely love about it is your point about time zones and children, which isn't about flying with kids, but in the sense of kids live in the present, adults always live in the future, and I'm very guilty of that, and I think probably a lot of other parents are too. How do you get past that?
Well, let me back up a bit and just explain that when we grow older, we realize how we don't know how to live in the present. And one of the pillars of learning how to live a joyful life is living in the present. So then you become a parent, and then you have a child, and here you're given this wondrous opportunity to follow their lead, because no one knows how to live in the present better than a child. So you're with your child is in the present, and if you are aware and you're willing to look in the mirror, you begin to see, holy cow, I don't know how to do this. How do I let go of the past, tripping about the past or forever preempting the future, and attune to the child in front of me? And it's our inability to do so that causes, dysfunction, conflict, and disconnection. Your question to how do we get past that, well, it's a multi-layered process. It is the essence of a mindful life. So the first step is to become aware that you're not in the present moment and you're actually disembodied from the present instant, from where you are in the here and now. Second, be willing to look in the mirror and say, I want to change this. This is not working for me. I'm forever anxious. I'm stressed out. I'm burdening my child now with my inability to be joyful, abundant, and present. And then start a training or a discipline or some way to control yourself, your mind, to bring yourself into the present moment. So that's why I call parenting and the parenting process and our children our greatest teachers in the journey of mindfulness, because no one will show that better than our children.
And I think living in the present doesn't just apply to those who have children.
Exactly.
I think it applies to anything. It's
Exactly.
being in the moment, enjoying the moment, as
Exactly.
opposed to worrying about whether you can get a cab an hour later
Exactly.
and whether you're going to hit traffic.
Right. It's the plague of the human condition that we don't know how to live in the present moment. And parenting is just the most fabulous, wondrous portal to get you there.
Now, I really love in the book how you wrote, when you had your child, one of the problems that you encountered was the inability to create boundaries and keep them. Shh. Shh. It's only in the book. Shh. I'm not sure. No one's watching.
It wasn't
it's okay.
me. Oops, sorry.
You're asking for a friend. But I think that's also a very, very prevalent issue with every single parent I know.
Right.
So what did you take away from that experience?
So when I began to see as a parent, even though I had been on a journey of mindfulness, I had studied psychology, I was a psychologist, even then there was a gross inability to be present enough to not only lay a boundary, but to hold the limit. And when a parent cannot lay a boundary, you know what happens. The kid pushes back, the kid doesn't listen, then we shame the kid, then we feel guilty, then we eat or drink too much or something like that. Or we punish, yell, and scream and shame the child, right? We put everything on the child. So when I began noticing that this was happening within me and the dynamic between me and my daughter, I had to look in the mirror and go, what is this about? Why am I unable to be in the moment and be aware and cohesive and coherent? And I discovered, as I help most parents to discover, that the answer lies in my conditioning as a child. How was I raised? So most people who have a hard time laying boundaries, either they're too wishy-washy or they're too controlling, it's because we have a desire to be perfect, to please, to accommodate. We can't tolerate the gray zone of just being in the moment. And every single human being has a problem with boundaries. We either push too hard or lean too far back. So I discovered that it's our conditioning as children that impede the present moment. And unless we discover how it is that our past obstructs the present, we will not be fruitful in almost any relationship, least of all that with our child.
And so how did you set boundaries?
Well, it's a gradual process of first understanding what boundaries I want to have. You can't have a boundary about everything with a child. So what are my sacred boundaries? I call them sacred boundaries. What are the truly life-affirming boundaries that I want to institute in my home? And then practicing the art of maintaining a limit. You know, half of us are ADD, or we're too lazy, or we're too tired. Who has time to, sit there for 5 minutes till the boundary is laid? We're off to the next thing. So I learned that I needed to develop the muscle to be so present, to embody what I'm teaching so I can model it, and then lay the boundary. And it's a daily struggle. Some days I'm better than others. But this is what I help parents discover. What are your sacred boundaries? And then how do you hold the limit, the mechanics of being so present that you don't let your child either catapult you into anger and reaction and control, and you don't become wishy-washy or a pushover. You have to maintain that line in the middle by staying there for a while. And it's mucky, and it's chaotic sometimes, and that's what we don't want to face, but we have to.
And let's backtrack a little bit. Which started at the beginning. What led you to write this book?
So I wrote this book, The Awakened Family, because I wanted to help parents understand that the most effective way to raise children is to raise yourself first. And when you raise yourself and deal with your own emotional junk and your own emotional baggage from your childhood, then you can discover who it is in front of you. Then you can say, wow, my child is not me. How do I deal with this spirit and not impose on this spirit everything that I think should be done or my way? And learning that delineation between where I end and where my child's spirit begins is key to help your child be free of your stuff. And this is why I wrote this book, to help parents discover how to heal themselves so they don't put on their children the burden of healing them, really.
And really, I think what you're talking about, at least from reading your book, is making your child be what you want them to be, as opposed to seeing them for who they are.
Correct.
And that seems to be another issue that's prevalent with nearly all the parents I know.
Well, every parent has a fantasy that you will raise children to be mini me's, mini puppets, products that they get to, show off as jewelry and on Facebook or social media, or, this is the thing. And when we do that, we do a great disservice to our children because we fail to attune to who it is they are, their inherent nature, their intrinsic spirit. And then the child develops a false sense of self. Most of us grew up like that, and we wanted to please our parents, and we never really discovered what was authentic to us. And this is what we struggle with till midlife. And then we say, you know what, now I'm going to start fresh. So why do we have to go through this whole process of unlayering? How about we teach parents not to put these layers on the children in the first place?
I mean, I remember when I was growing up, I was always told, little girls don't get angry. You don't yell and shout. Little girls shouldn't act that way.
Right.
And that's another thing that you bring up in the book, this, I don't want to sound too, touchy-feely here, but this inability to validate your kids' feelings, that we're allowed to be pissed off and frustrated and yell at cab drivers if they're going too slow or whatever. But God forbid, like, your child has an outburst. That's not okay. Like,
Right.
We're always supposed to be polite and nice.
It's this whole cultural mindset, I call it the Parental KoolAid, which is a collective cultural trance that we all are, seduced in, that treats children as commodities in a way. We commodify children and we kind of just manage them, and we don't realize that the very things we put on them and expect from them, we really don't place on ourselves. It's a great hypocrisy that exists in the parent-child relationship. And we were all burdened by this hypocrisy. We saw it in our parents, but didn't dare call them out on it. And those who dared to call them out on it paid a heavier price. When they entered rebellion, they had to pay a price for it.
So how do you break free from that as a parent?
you make a decision, you make a commitment that I am going to change the paradigm in my home. I'm not going to follow mainstream's ways to fix, produce, manage my child anymore. I'm going to make a commitment that I brought this being into this earth so that they could manifest their truest expression, whatever that may be. Now, of course, there will be some contamination because we're human and we're going to dump some stuff on our children, but how can I best leash that in? How can I best bridle that? How can I best check that, you know? And parents don't check their ego, you know? They don't check their projection. We're not told we need to. We're told that we have a righteousness as parents. Do what you want. It's my child, right? Dare you tell another parent on the playground, you know, I think you're, you know, shaming your kid right now. That parent is going to, you know, go against you. So we need to break down these defenses and collectively stand up for our children, that their voices need to be heard as they are, and we need to stop imposing on them this mini-me desire, this desire that they become adults before their time.
And you do that by asking questions, such as, I know that you bring some up in the book.
Well, many questions, right? And all questions are always pointed back to the self. And this is for any relationship. What am I bringing into the dynamic right now? Why is this triggering me? You know, what in my past is this reminding me of? Every dynamic triggers these kind of questions. Unfortunately, we're not trained to look inward. We just dump all our stuff on the outside and blame the other person. So with our children, it's imperative that we ask, what is this about me? Why am I putting this on my child? Where did this come from? You know, I talk about parents being directors of their own movie, writing their own script, and then recruiting their children, and their children, if they had a voice, they would say, I don't think I signed up for this movie, you know? I wanted to go this way, and you've taken me an entirely different way from my spirit, and now thank you very much. I'm in my 50s in therapy every day, and now trying to undo, trying to re-listen, relearn who it is I truly was. You know, and so the least number of layers we can put on our children, the slightly more free they will be.
So how do you see your kid for who he or she is?
It's not easy because this deadly thing called projection, which we just stamp on the world, ensnares us and it blinds us. It obfuscates what is reality. You know, we all have our own stories in our head. You know, if we have the victim story, then anytime your kid says no to you, you're like, oh my goodness, this always happens to me, and we shame the kid. Versus if you didn't have the victim story, your kid says no to you, you're like, okay, right? So in just that moment, you don't put something on your child. Pick up the bowl. You know, your kid will leave the bowl or leave the bathroom dirty or leave the clothes. How about we just say, pick up your clothes? But no, why would we just say that? We're like, your father treats me in the same way, and his mother treats me, and my mother never listened to me, and there goes the story, and this kid is like, I just forgot to pick up my clothes, Mom. So it's this imposition of our unresolved stuff that is bursting from us, that we get a ready receptacle, this poor little kid, we're like, now I can tell you how it will be, and you will just listen to me. You know, this is our ready victim right here.
Do you have to restrain yourself when you're at the playground or the park and you see people just being crazy?
Well, it for me, you know, I try to move past judgment because I'd be in judgment all day long, right? It's so easy to judge, and we parents are the best judgers, we moms especially. So we have to move away from judgment into just fascination, a little bit of horror, and then decide to take some courage, you know, and go up and say something. I've done that. I've gone up to a dad who was yelling at a 3-year-old. I was on an island vacation, and my daughter was like, Mom, don't. And she was trying to brace me, and I said, oh, yes, I am. And I went up to him and I said, you know, how would you feel? He's 3 years old, it's 9:30. No 3-year-old should be out at this time of the night, but you want to be selfish, so why don't you control yourself? And he was just like, oh, okay. And I said, I'm a psychologist. I understand that you don't mean it, but you are just causing generational trauma, so stop. And, you know, he felt a little ashamed and at least
That's amazing.
moved out of the way. So not everyone should take action like this. You know, you have to think when you want to take action. But we have to speak up for these defenseless beings that we're just happily just dumping all this garbage on.
What is the most common parenting mistake that you see people make?
It's this delusion that you can control your child. You have this righteousness about you. You never check yourself. This whole idea that you get to discipline your kid, you know, which is AKA just like maliciously control, threaten, punish, shame. that's what discipline has become. This whole idea needs to be completely eviscerated, debunked, and parents need to become humble. And just because they have hierarchical control, and yes, they are in charge of the home, and yes, they are bigger, they need to check themselves, and learn from your child too. It's not just a one-way learning that occurs.
Okay, but in fairness, what do you do if your kid just will not listen to you? Like if you're like, okay, it's 8:30, it's bedtime, time to brush your teeth and go to bed. And they're like, no, not doing it, no.
Well,
this has never happened to me, by the way.
Never,
I'm asking
ever.
for a friend.
Yeah, your kid would never do that. First, when parents propose questions like this, look how you pitched it. You're like, what if your kid never, right? We always do these extreme situations, like my kid is evil. I'm telling you, my kid is evil. That cannot exist in a black and white situation. There is a gradient to every human being. There's a connected relationship that you can work on and build on. You can, but if you don't have that connection with your child and you haven't developed that deep trust that your child trusts you, and if your child feels abandoned at bedtime or your child feels scared of the toothpaste, there's always a reason why our children dig their heels in. Just like when we dig our heels in at work, there's a reason, right? And we'll justify our digging our heels in perfectly, so articulately. But when the kid digs their heels in, what do we call them? Defiant and bad and shameful.
You get a timeout.
You get a timeout. This is what I mean, this righteous delusion that we have control. That's the sneaky element of parenting that I'm here to pop the bubble in, that no, we can't act like this. We have to have deep empathy and relate to your child. And no child is just bad. They're just bad, but they're also tired, or they're just being defiant, but they're also hungry. And what are you doing about that as a parent?
And the way to deal with that, you write, is to ask them questions. So I want to know what you're feeling about this. Why won't you go to bed?
Well,
Tell
ask
me
yourself,
how you feel.
right? If you're deeply connected to your child, you just have to ask yourself, let me figure out what my kid needs right now. Because a 3-year-old may not be able to say, Mommy, you ignored me all day and you've been on your phone all day and now I'm just feeling like an empty vessel and I'm scared to go to bed, right? Your kid is not going to be able to say that.
My kid could totally say that at age 3, so there.
Genius. Show off. So you have to be so attuned to your kid, at least till the age of 10, when they're still, relying on us to shape and give form to their experiences. If you're very attuned to your kid, you're going to know what's going on. The poor kid cannot be depended on to tell you, Mom, take a chill pill, take a deep breath. I get like this after 9 o'clock. We expect our children to be able to say that to us. How can they? They're just going to disintegrate. That's all they know how to do.
And I have a question for you that I think that this probably applies to a lot of people. I have a girlfriend who she sees her child as one thing and her kid is something else entirely.
Right.
And the kid needs a whole different, I think, set of parameters than she provides. It's like she's raising her fantasy child as opposed to who the kid really is. When is it appropriate to say something? Never?
No, not never. I just said we should stand up, but we have to weigh the situation, and then be willing to take the risk of never being spoken to again. But I would really pitch it from the angle of, does your kid look like he's joyful? Does your kid, is your kid trying to communicate that he's suffering? Always try and, bring the parent to empathize with what the kid is going through, and then gently deconstruct the parent's, fantasy. It's a grief process parents go through. We have a fantasy around how we will be as parents and this genius that we're going to raise. And when you realize that your kid ain't no genius, not going to be playing, at the symphony hall by 4, you're like, oh, God, this kid is ordinary. And then you're confronted with your own ordinariness. And you're like, I didn't want to be ordinary. I thought that this kid will make me feel good about myself. And why didn't anyone tell me this? So my book lays it out there, that you will most likely, and you should get the most extraordinarily ordinary child. And you should be able to revel in that without wanting your kid to boost your ego.
Because that's really what it's about. And I'm also curious, what are your thoughts on this whole influx of posting the perfect image of your child on social media? So this complete fantasia of perfection
Right.
that so many parents engage in, because you look at their Instagrams and you're like, oh my God.
Yeah, my
Like
goodness.
their kids like never cry and they're never dirty and
Only
this
gold
is-
medals every day.
Yes,
and
yes, and they're eating kale voluntarily. Like this is, what am I doing wrong? I mean, and my question is it a disservice to the child when the child is old enough to understand what happened?
This is a bomb of a question. It's going to explode in many, many ways. So let me just touch it just slightly because it's heavily layered. The first thing is that what we used to do over the kitchen table with the album, the family album, and say, hey, look at my cute kid. He won the local gymnastics competition. Now we amplify it on Facebook. So
And share it with the world, basically.
Share it with strangers. What does it matter? Like, you need validation from somebody you didn't meet now, right? So now they become part of your cyberspace fantasy world. So when somebody who you don't know then says, you know, something negative, now you're going to start getting into a tizzy about that now. I mean, it's become disproportionately insane. So on one level, it's just madness. On the other level is, you know, your kid didn't sign up for this. Again, you know, why are you using your kid to make you feel good? Your kid is not saying, hey, mom, I'm going to, you know, do this competition only if I win and only if you post it on social media, right? The kid is not saying that. The kid doesn't need that. The kid is happy with two friends saying, hey, good job. And, you know, engaging in the process of learning something. So we take this to this insane level, this disproportionate level. Then we are caught up in our identity as being this fabulous parent. Then dare the kid let you down. I mean, it just gets stacked up on so many dysfunctional levels. But who begins it? Not even the parent in their sane mind. It's the unconsciousness of the parent that's so hungry, all of us, hungry for validation, hungry to be told, am I good enough now? Look, my kid is getting a medal. Now am I good enough? Look, he's eating kale. We'll take a picture of the kale. Fabulous. And then the kid eats an ice cream right after that. We don't take a picture of that. Right. So we're just hungry for validation as human beings. And this is what you're seeing being played out with our children. It's just another manifestation of that.
Oh, okay. That was I could do this for hours. I literally have so many questions, but I'm sure our audience does too.
Hi, thanks for being here. I have a couple of family members who are autistic, and I know the parents had a little hard time raising them. Do you have any suggestions or tips for that?
They have a hard time raising them just because of the difficulties that come with this diagnosis?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty big question.
Yeah, that's a huge question. So in short, you know, whatever child you get is going to be somewhere on the spectrum of very difficult to horridly difficult, right? I mean, children start at very difficult. You know, that's just the nature of children. They're not being difficult. It's just difficult for us adults. They're not being difficult, right? They are coming as they are, and we don't have the skills to deal with these children. That child, this child, doesn't matter. Even if you have, quote unquote, a child with no diagnosis, trust me, that parent will talk about how difficult that child is. It doesn't matter. It's all relative on some level. So this journey needs to become one where we parents take it upon ourselves to learn the tasks and the skills that we need to and stop putting it on our children. It's us who needs to grow up, mature, stabilize, change, become organized. And then the kid could still have issues, but now you've mitigated the issues, haven't you? So at least we've taken care of what junk we bring into the dynamic.
Next question, please.
Hi, I was wondering what parenting techniques you've adopted from your own parents.
From my own parents, I think, you know, my mother has taught me the ability to, you know, curb the need to react at every moment, you know, to zip it, to be in silence. She's always telling me, just let it go, just let it go. Don't say anything, don't say anything. And while it sounds to a control freak that she's saying to be a pushover, what I've realized is that there is great wisdom in not reacting in the moment and waiting in stillness, which is so hard to do when you're all triggered up, to wait for the wisest response to show up. Because as a parent, you'll quickly realize that any time you say the wrong thing, you will pay a price for it. So it's almost easier to not say anything in that moment and to wait. because either way you'll be cleaning up the mess, you know? So you have to become so deliberate. And from my father, I learned how to be deeply unattached to achievement. He taught me that as a young child. You know, I would run home and say, I got an A grade, I got an A grade, where's my party, where's my, you know, lollipop, where's my doll, always looking for some validation. And he would say, you got an A grade? That's your grade. Are you happy with your grade, you know? And I was like, but I need more. And he taught me that that grade doesn't mean that you're now something greater than what you were if you got a C grade. And although I resented it in the moment, I've learned with my own child, don't put pressure about that grade on your kid, because there's so many kids out there at school who are terrified to tell their children that they got a C grade or even a low A today. You can't even get a low A without feeling ashamed. This is the pressure we put on our children, and not just pressure because they're weak to handle it. No, not just that. We're teaching them that this grade, this perfectionism, this achievement, this doing, is who they need to be to become worthy. They need to be the grade. They need to be the achiever. They need to be the perfectionist. Now that becomes toxic later on. We all know that because we live with some of this when we are grown up, right?
And we have time for one more question, please.
Hi, thanks for being here. So I was wondering how long it took for you to write this book, and did you ever get writer's block while writing this book?
So I think I have the opposite of writer's block, which is an equal problem, let me tell you. It may sound like, oh, she's just like, again, praising herself or something. No, it's actually a deep problem. So I have like writer's vomit, you know, or something like that, where my editor has to literally whiplash me and say, I will not read another word. I'm like, but this is a genius insight. So that's some other kind of sickness, you know, where it just flows untethered and you don't know when to stop. I mean, I could just keep writing about this because for me, the human condition is infinitely nuanced. Everything is a deep insight, right? For that one person out of the 1,000, I didn't address that one person. So I'm always feeling unfinished. But I have to learn when enough is enough and discipline myself. So I have the other problem.
Well, the book is in stores now. And thank you so much, Dr. Shefali, for being here.
Thank you all.